Our greatest infectious disease experts have a warning for the world. Do you feel humanity is ready for the next pandemic?
I mean, we're definitely not prepared.
So it's absolutely true that governments have moved on. They've got other priorities.
What we don't see is the investment that was promised.
You know, the closest we've gotten is about a few $100 million per year, so not even 5% of what we need at the international level.
If you're prepared to invest every year substantial amounts in military defence, the biological defence should have an equal footing.
COVID-19 took more than 7 million lives, upended economies, left countries in crisis, and brought our hectic planet to a standstill. But scientists say far worse pandemics are on their way.
The COVID-19 pandemic was actually one of the milder pandemics. Less than 1% of people died in the world. But there have been pandemics like plague in the 14th century, which killed half of the global population. And that needs a completely different thinking about planning. How do you regulate vaccine development when half of the people are dying?
Viruses, bacteria, parasites, an array of organisms called pathogens cause infectious diseases. The World Health Organization is warning humanity about Disease X, an unknown bug that causes catastrophe. But with medical misinformation and anti-vaxxer attitudes on the rise, will the world take the threat seriously?
We can have the best technologies and the best products and the best public health policies, but if the community aren't with us on that, then it's going to fail.
In episode 2 of a special series about pandemic preparedness, we'll examine the challenges in readying the planet for Disease X. So let's flatten the curve. One of the most remarkable medical feats of the 21st century occurred here in the laboratories of the Oxford Vaccine Group. It's where scientists created one of the world's first COVID-19 vaccines. The leader of that team, Oxford University professor Andrew Pollard, says the race to save lives during the pandemic has led to a golden age of medicine.
There are many more investigators in academia as well as in industry working on the development of vaccines that could manage future pandemics. I think we are in a good position. We really know how to make vaccines against a wide range of viruses and bacteria which threaten human populations. So the science is really there. We know how to do it.
Britain's financial capital, quiet, empty, but what's meant to be the height of the working week. Scientists say the UK is entering the deadliest phase of the outbreak.
The UK has recorded its first day of more than 500 deaths.
Amid the chaos, global lockdowns and soaring fatalities, the United Kingdom was the first Western nation to approve a vaccine against COVID-19. At the age of 90, Margaret Keenan was inoculated with the Pfizer jab in December 2020, marking the start of a historic mass vaccination program. Shortly after, Oxford University's vaccine, created with British-Swedish company AstraZeneca, was also approved.
It's a fantastic achievement for British science, which will allow us to vaccinate more people and also vaccinate them more quickly.
These vaccines were created and approved in less than a year. Warp speed for a resource-intensive process that can take a decade.
There was rapid scale-up at a time frame we'd never seen before. So those first clinical trials started 66 days after the sequence of the virus was made publicly available. And then 326 days later, we had the first vaccines available. So that's never been achieved before, and quite frankly, I didn't think it could be done, but it was done.
One of the things we need to remember in the last pandemic, we got very lucky. Almost all of the vaccines worked. That is not the history of vaccine development.
The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was cheaper than other COVID-19 jabs and had greater efficacy than those made in China and Russia. Easier to refrigerate and transport, it saved an estimated 6.3 million lives at the height of the pandemic and helped limit humanitarian crises across the global south.
I was there in the room when the first person received the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. I thought it was great seeing that, but actually for me, the most thrilling moment was seeing aeroplanes landing with our vaccine in Africa, in remote islands in the Pacific, in Latin America. That was thrilling.
Professor Pollard says another major scientific breakthrough in the race to make COVID-19 vaccines was advances in mRNA technology.
So mRNA technology is essentially a vaccine that contains a bit of the genetic code of the virus, so that when it's used for an immunisation, it's taken into our bodies, and our bodies make the vaccine in the factory of our cells to then stimulate an immune response which protects us against these terrible diseases. The reason why RNA vaccines are a game changer is about speed. Using the traditional way of making flu vaccines, you need 6 months to make the first dose. Whereas with RNA, we can get there in 6 weeks.
Today, Oxford University is using mRNA and other technologies to develop 20 new vaccines. What diseases are you looking to find cures or medicines for?
We're targeting many other diseases at the moment which are a threat to human health. So diseases like Nipah virus, Congo-Crimean, hemorrhagic fever virus, Ebola, Marburg. Was that one already in the ice or not?
While such scientific progress is cause for celebration, Professor Pollard says the world needs to produce vaccines in 100 days to face disease X. That's a third of the time it took to make the COVID-19 vaccines. And so far, this goal is a pipe dream.
I feel pessimistic. I don't think we're there yet. Well, the first is just to make sure the research is done so that we already have vaccines on the shelf that don't need very much more work to save lives. And the problem even with COVID was that although we could rapidly make vaccines, they still had nearly a year of testing to go through before they could be deployed. And the manufacturing with new vaccines often takes years. So we need to solve the bottlenecks in the clinical development, the manufacturing and the regulation to bring things down to 100 days. And that's a really tall order.
In 2024, an avian influenza outbreak rocked global agriculture. Then, soaring fatalities across Africa from a deadly new variant of Mpox prompted a health emergency. Amid the constant threat of contagion, scientists warn not enough research has been done on diseases that threaten humanity.
Some organisations have 100 diseases on the list, and we're probably touching somewhere about 10 to 15 of those. In the recent pandemic, we were dealing with a coronavirus, which we knew a lot about. What seemed like rapid development in the pandemic was built on about 20 years of research beforehand. And that's the difficulty we have for disease X, that we haven't done that 20 years of research yet.
Oxford University is home to some of the world's leading minds on disease preparedness. Professor Peter Horby leads the Pandemic Sciences Institute, which was set up to draw upon lessons from COVID-19.
My worry is that COVID was devastating, but it could have been worse. It didn't have a big effect on children. Imagine if you'd had a virus that was transmitted very readily within children, kindergartens or schools, and had a severity of 1-2% fatality in that population. Then that would be a different ball game.
Britain conducted some of the most successful vaccine development and clinical trials during the pandemic. Professor Horby worked with scientists in China to characterise COVID-19 and oversaw the world's largest clinical trial of possible treatments for the virus.
So we've looked at the numbers, and if we treat 8 patients in intensive care with this drug, we'll save 1 life.
But today, such work depends increasingly on philanthropy.
I don't think there's sufficient investment in developing the products that we need to be ready for the next pandemic. And I think that's the area that worries me the most, because with a new pandemic, we can't expect to have treatments and vaccines much quicker than we did for COVID. And it may be that we can't even make a vaccine for disease X. And so we are going to have to rely on sort of social, behavioural, community measures at the outset, inevitably.
Apathy across society also frustrates disease experts.
That extreme crisis that we all lived through and the need to really do something to not repeat that kind of disaster again, I do think that's been forgotten.
I don't believe we should think that COVID-19 is a once-in-a-generation event. It has been estimated that the risk of another pandemic of equal severity to COVID-19 in the next 10 years is about 25%.
But if a disease X pandemic does occur, Professor Horby's worried that sections of society might revolt.
We've seen there's been a lot of discord about what was done, and people saying that lockdowns were a huge mistake and other people saying that lockdowns were very necessary. So we've almost seen a polarisation that wasn't there before COVID. My worry is that polarisation of views about social measures and vaccination will actually make it even more challenging next time. So we really need to be prepared for that, because you can have great products, but if people won't take them, they're useless.
Ironically, some of the strongest resistance is in France, a country known for pioneering immunisation. Louis Pasteur created a rabies vaccine here back in 1885.
France has become one of the most vaccine-sceptical countries on earth, and distrust of the institutions and authorities is part of the national character.
Diane Thevenon lives in this studio apartment in the heart of Paris with her husband and son Victor, whom she homeschools.
Non, ce passage, Victor, il faut que tu le travailles plus lentement. Ça. Allez.
None of them are immunised against COVID-19. She believes previous vaccines caused her father to develop an undiagnosed autoimmune disease, which has been passed on to her entire family. There is no medical evidence to back up Diane's claims.
Oui, mais moi, la totalité des vaccins me pose problème. Mais moi, mon problème principal, c'est le fait qu'on ne sache pas où on va exactement avec le système immunitaire. Tant que cette question-là ne sera pas réglée, oui, bien sûr, je serai méfiante envers les vaccins.
There are some people that would listen to this and think it's not grounded in scientific fact. It's a very radical approach to vaccines and medicine. I mean, what do you have to say to them?
Je n'oblige personne à ne pas aller chez le médecin pour se faire vacciner. Voilà. Prouver, alors certes, ce n'est pas une démarche scientifique, hein, c'est très empirique, mais ça me concerne. Et je suis libre de mes décisions par rapport à mon corps, en fonction de mon histoire et en fonction de mes connaissances.
During the pandemic, Diane's father died 4 days after receiving the COVID-19 jab. She didn't ask for an autopsy, but believes it caused his death.
J'étais choquée. J'étais incapable de parler ce jour-là. J'ai pas pu échanger quoi que ce soit avec le médecin, j'en étais pas capable, simplement. Donc on en est resté là, sur les documents officiels, c'est-à-dire mort subite.
Did your father's death further fuel your suspicion of the COVID-19 vaccine?
Oui, c'est sûr, on a l'impression d'être un peu traités comme des cobayes. D'avoir un médicament magique comme ça, d'avoir un vaccin magique qui soignerait une maladie qui apparaît comme ça, qui sort, on ne sait pas bien où, un foyer en Chine, une chauve-souris, un cochon, enfin bon, c'est un petit peu curieux quand même ces arguments.
Instead of trusting doctors, Diane follows French commentators and radio hosts whose anti-vaccine rhetoric is widely discredited. She's also part of a Facebook group where French citizens share COVID-19 conspiracy theories. In 2020, the number of likes for French Facebook pages sharing anti-vaccine content increased by 27%.
Élan, il y a beaucoup de membres qui sont arrivés d'un coup sur ce groupe pour pouvoir témoigner et libérer leur parole parce qu'ils n'avaient pas forcément cet espace de parole au sein de leur propre famille.
Rudi Reichstadt researches disinformation for a French non-profit called Conspiracy Watch.
Aujourd'hui, on vit dans un système aberrant dans lequel la désinformation coûte très peu cher à produire. En revanche, lutter contre la désinformation, ça coûte très cher.
COVID-19 killed 168,000 people in France, which had one of the lowest vaccination rates in the EU. Rudi says 2 out of every 5 French citizens distrust vaccines.
Ça fait des années qu'on dispose aujourd'hui, en France en tout cas, d'enquêtes d'opinion qui montrent effectivement une forte défiance à l'égard des vaccins. Et même l'idée que plus de 40% des Français pensent qu'il y a une collusion entre l'industrie pharmaceutique et le pouvoir politique, et notamment le ministère de la Santé, pour cacher au grand public la réalité sur la nocivité des vaccins. Voilà.
Rudi says young people are at the heart of French anti-vaccination movements. Others who gravitate towards these resistance groups tend to lean to the extreme left and extreme right of the political spectrum.
On peut être très intelligent et être très conspirationniste. Ensuite, ce qu'on observe, c'est que bien sûr, on a des gens qui sont des intellectuels, même des universitaires, des médecins, des grands professeurs, y compris des prix Nobel, qui prennent des positions tout à fait contestables et qui sont en opposition avec le consensus scientifique.
Some nurses have also joined the anti-vaxxer movement. I'm off to meet one in a Parisian park. Florence Heshmati worked in the psychiatric ward of a hospital, but stopped during the pandemic. She believes the COVID-19 outbreak was real but exaggerated, claiming the large death toll was due to societal stress and medical neglect of other diseases like cancer.
Hi.
True, nice to meet you. Hey, how are you going?
For her, the pandemic was an awakening that made her question vaccines, hospitals and doctors.
You're vaccinated. Do you regret that?
Oui. J'ai été vaccinée en plus travaillant pendant 17 ans à l'hôpital. Mes enfants aussi ont eu leur vaccin enfant. Oui, je regrette. Et il y a encore quelques années, j'avais encore confiance dans le milieu médical. Mais on voit bien que derrière les intentions, c'est plus un profit maximal. De voir qu'on forçait tout le monde, sans chercher à voir si les gens avaient des anticorps ou pas, avaient attrapé le Covid, donc étaient protégés. Ça m'a mis la puce à l'oreille, voilà. Moi, j'ai refusé de participer à tout ça. Il était hors de question que j'injecte ce produit expérimental à quelqu'un.
Her crusade against vaccines has had significant personal consequences.
Ça m'a coûté des amis, de la famille avec qui on a pris de la distance. Donc voilà, ça m'a coûté ma carrière à l'hôpital. J'ai pas eu de salaire pendant plusieurs mois, plus de 9 mois sans salaire. 0 €, j'ai pas eu d'aide du gouvernement ou on a dû faire des paniers repas, mais j'aurais préféré devenir clochard, d'être à la rue plutôt que de me faire piquer avec ce produit.
Florence is a member of France's Yellow Vest protest movement, whose fiery rallies make global headlines. They demonstrated against vaccination passports and movement restrictions for unvaccinated workers. If a new pandemic comes, Florence says she and a large swathe of France's population won't comply with any lockdown or vaccination order.
Oui, je serais beaucoup plus résistante.
What's your view on Disease X?
Pour moi, je pense encore que c'est de la manipulation pour tenir les peuples déjà asservis, sous contrôle, garder l'hypnose collective. Donc l'hypnose par la peur fonctionne très bien.
In preparing for Disease X, a big challenge for the World Health Organization is how to address growing distrust in life-saving vaccines, as well as rising hostility to science. I'm interested to know from an industry perspective, what can we do to address vaccine hesitancy?
I think at times we can be a little arrogant because I think we think that because these are the facts, because we have the data, this is the way it should be. People have beliefs, and none of us should belittle other people's beliefs. We need to be able to talk and understand who people get their sources of information from, what their concerns are. You know, what would you need to hear and from who to make you feel okay about this?
We need to break this cycle where people are being misinformed, disinformed. We need a healthy debate. But if you reach a point where you cannot decide to do anything because you are overwhelmed with negative information, then you end up being paralyzed.
I think for me, the bigger threat is disinformation, which is this intentional spreading of lies. I don't think we know how to deal with that. And we have to figure out how to deal with that because, of course, that's not going away.
The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was marred by controversy and distrust when it was linked to very rare blood clots. Anti-vaxxers added fuel to the fire, falsely claiming the vaccine caused female infertility. The WHO pushed back against that fear and speculation.
The benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine far outweigh its risk, and its use should continue to save lives.
But several European countries restricted its use in older age groups due to a lack of data about its effectiveness in elderly people. And French President Emmanuel Macron went as far as to claim that the vaccine was quasi-ineffective.
Quand on a une information laissant à penser qu'un vaccin pas complètement sûr, eh bien c'est le devoir des gouvernements, des autorités sanitaires de le dire, et à ce moment-là de retirer le vaccin et d'être absolument transparent. Bien sûr que ça peut avoir des effets, nourrir de la défiance, et bien sûr que les désinformateurs vont s'empresser d'instrumentaliser et d'exploiter ces incertitudes-là, comme ils le font toujours.
The result in France was 3/4 of their Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine supply was unused at the height of the pandemic in 2021.
I think if we look back to 2021, there were a number of comments in Germany about the Oxford vaccine not working in the elderly. And as you mentioned, Macron said it was quasi-ineffective. I'm not sure what the statement means, but it is very difficult to understand why those comments were made at a time when there was such a shortage of supply and people were dying in those countries from COVID-19 and the evidence was there that the vaccines were licensed. So it is difficult to understand why they made those comments because it must either have been a scientific opinion that was being given to them, or it's a political opinion. But I don't think we have a clear understanding of that, but there's no doubt that it undermines trust. I think at that point, that's where misinterpretation or misrepresentation of facts leads to mortality.
AstraZeneca has begun the global withdrawal of its COVID-19 jabs due to a surplus of other updated mRNA vaccines that target new variants of the virus. Praised for saving millions of lives at the pandemic's peak, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is also a symbol of what can happen in a post-truth world where medical skepticism and conspiracy abounds.
Well, I think the politicisation of vaccines is a real risk. If vaccines become a political tool, then the opposing view is an anti-vaccine view, and that's not a scientific position that makes any sense to take. And I think it's very dangerous for the future of public health.
And that's the end of this edition of Flatten the Curve. Did you watch our episode about vaccine inequity and the pandemic treaty? To watch the series, go to aje.io/virus. Thanks for watching.